more than 5 months since she disappeared. In this episode, digging into what went on behind the scenes with the FBI last week when it comes to the mixed messaging about the ransom notes, and I've learned some new information about exactly what it seems was happening and why there was the mixed messaging that came out. Really interesting. Also, I have the full criminal complaint for Derek Kayea, who is the guy who was arrested for sending the fake ransom note. But what I found interesting about it is it actually includes some new information about the Nancy Guthrie investigation, so I'll get into that. And then also Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos did an interview with a local affiliate with something interesting he said about DNA, and I'm going to sort of dig into that and what it could mean about what's happening behind the scenes. And first of all, I'm starting to sort of peel back the layers and figure out why we were getting mixed messages from the FBI last week when it comes to whether the ransom notes are real or not. You remember, and I've always reported based on my sources that they could be real, at least the first two that went to the local TV stations. That's just what I've been told, that they are still investigating them as if they are real. And they may not be real, but they're investigating them as if they are real. And remember, Savannah Guthrie said in her Today Show interview that she tended to believe that they were real. But just a quick recap, last week, Reuters, which is a respectable news organization, by the way. I mean, it's like, you got Associated Press, you've got Reuters. I mean, they've been wrong about some things in the past, but for the most part, they're legit. They put out a report, according to sources, law enforcement sources, that the FBI had come to the conclusion that none of the notes were real, so that they were fake, which surprised me based on what I was hearing from my sources, because it was kind of the opposite. And it also just surprised me that they would put that out with such like a stamp on it. Like how could anyone in law enforcement really know if there's no suspect? And they really haven't made a ton of progress in terms of figuring out who the suspect is based on what I've been told. Like, how would they be able to say for sure that the notes are fake? So I was skeptical of the report from the beginning, but interested in it because it was Reuters and because, they are legit.
Deputies find a trail of blood at the front door of an 84-year-old woman's home. It stops before it reaches the street. There's no body, no sign of forced entry beyond the porch, and no answers about where she went or who took her. This case involves a violent abduction and an investigation that remains unsolved. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome to Cold Case News Nation. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from tonight. Let's get into the file. Tonight we're covering a case built by decades of investigative experience, and we're applying that same scrutiny here, fact by fact, without getting ahead of what's actually been confirmed. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old, living in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood outside Tucson, Arizona. She's the mother of NBC News journalist and Today Show co-anchor Savannah Guthrie, along with two other adult children, Annie and Cameron. Before this case made national headlines, Nancy was known simply as a mother and grandmother living a quiet life in the desert. The last confirmed sighting of Nancy came on the evening of January 31st, 2026. She had dinner at her daughter Annie's home, not far from her own house. By all accounts, it was an ordinary night. Nothing about the visit suggested anything was wrong. She left for home afterward, and that dinner became the final time her family knowingly saw her before everything changed. Nancy didn't show up for church the next morning, February 1st. Family members grew concerned when she couldn't be reached, and a welfare check was requested. What deputies found at her home prompted an immediate escalation, and Nancy Guthrie was officially reported missing that day. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos addressed the case publicly within hours. He didn't hedge. He stated plainly that the evidence pointed to an abduction, not a wandering elderly woman or a medical emergency. That statement set the tone for what would become a massive, sustained, multi-agency investigation. Investigators later recovered footage from Nancy's home security system, a Google Nest camera, showing a masked individual approaching her front door in the early hours of February 1st. The person was wearing gloves, a black Ozark trail hiker backpack, and was carrying a firearm. In one clip, the individual raises a gloved hand toward the camera itself, before the footage shows them tampering with the device. The video doesn't show a face, but it captures enough: facial hair around the mouth, distinctive eyebrows visible through the mask's eye openings, a build described as average, somewhere around 5'9". That footage became the single most important piece of visual evidence in the case. But a video alone doesn't explain who this person was, why they targeted this house, or where Nancy ended up. To understand that, investigators had to build their case from something more permanent than pixels. They had to build it from evidence left behind at the scene itself. Start with the blood. Investigators confirmed that blood found at Nancy's home matched her DNA. It was located near the front porch, and the trail effectively stopped before reaching the driveway's edge, well short of the street. That detail matters. It tells investigators force was used at the point of contact, but it also raises a question about how Nancy was moved from that spot onward, since there's no continued blood trail leading to a vehicle or the road. The footage itself became public only after a technical breakthrough. FBI Director Kash Patel confirmed that agents were able to recover previously inaccessible video from what he called back-end systems tied to the home's cloud-connected camera. In simple terms, even after footage seemed lost or corrupted on the device itself, investigators pulled it from server-side storage. Once the FBI released it publicly, tips into the case increased dramatically within hours, giving investigators a flood of new information to sort through. Investigators also recovered a black glove near Nancy's property, one that appeared consistent with the type worn by the individual seen in the footage. It wasn't the only one. Roughly 16 gloves in total were collected from the area during the search. Each was submitted for DNA testing, since gloves worn during a crime can still carry biological material from the person wearing them: sweat, skin cells, transferred material from a struggle. The scale of the response matched the seriousness of the crime. The Pima County Sheriff's Department led the investigation, working alongside the FBI's Evidence Response Team, Customs and Border Protection, given the home's proximity to the U.S.-Mexico border, and multiple search and rescue units covering difficult desert terrain in the surrounding area. Roughly 10 days into the case, investigators executed a search warrant at a property in Rio Rico, Arizona, about an hour south of Tucson near the border. A person was detained during a traffic stop connected to the investigation. They were questioned and released without charges. Around the same time, a Range Rover was towed from a Tucson area parking lot for forensic testing, with investigators waiting on DNA results from inside the vehicle. A vehicle recovered in a case like this can carry more evidentiary weight than almost anything else at a crime scene. Investigators have long said people leave behind more inside their cars than almost anywhere else: fibers, DNA, GPS history, phone connections. If a suspect used a vehicle to transport Nancy from the scene, that vehicle becomes a timeline in itself, one that can place a person somewhere they'd otherwise deny being. As evidence came in, investigators found themselves weighing two very different explanations. Multiple experts who reviewed the doorbell footage told reporters the incident didn't look like a planned kidnapping, pointing instead toward a burglary that went wrong. But officially, the FBI has continued to investigate the case as a kidnapping for ransom, a classification that remains in place today. Those two theories aren't mutually exclusive early in an investigation, but they lead detectives down very different paths. There's more to this case than physical evidence, though. Within days of Nancy's disappearance, her family and local media outlets started receiving messages claiming to be from whoever took her. If you want to understand how those notes reshaped this investigation, stay with us, because subscribing means you won't miss where this leads next. In the days following Nancy's disappearance, local Tucson media outlets received two separate ransom notes that investigators deemed potentially credible enough to trace. One demanded payment in Bitcoin for her safe return. A second, sent shortly after, claimed Nancy had died following the abduction. That note reportedly stated the people responsible never intended to hurt her, that she died shortly after being taken, and that she was, in its words, buried in nature. Multiple deadlines tied to these notes passed. No exchange of funds or cryptocurrency was ever made between the note's senders and either law enforcement or the Guthrie family. A combined reward of $1.2 million has been offered for information leading to Nancy's recovery. Tip lines remain open through both the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Department, and investigators have continued urging anyone with information, no matter how small, to come forward. In July 2026, the case saw its first criminal conviction, though not the one anyone following this case was hoping for. A California man named Derek Colella pleaded guilty to 2 federal felony counts for sending a false ransom demand across state lines and using a telecommunications device to harass Nancy's family. Prosecutors said Colella tested positive for drugs at the time of his plea. He's scheduled to be sentenced in September 2026, and a judge has since ordered him into inpatient treatment before that date. Investigators have been clear that Colella is not connected to the earlier, more credible notes still under review. That distinction matters, because the FBI confirmed in a public statement that some ransom notes received throughout the investigation have been discounted as extortion attempts without legitimacy, while others are still being evaluated as potentially legitimate. The agency reiterated that the case continues to be investigated as a kidnapping for ransom, even as it works to separate real leads from opportunists exploiting a high-profile tragedy. As months passed without an arrest, public theories multiplied. Some analysts pointed to a robbery that escalated into violence. Others maintained the ransom notes reflected genuine intent, supporting a planned kidnapping. Cross-border theories circulated given the home's proximity to Mexico. Investigators and commentators have gone back and forth on whether one person acted alone or whether this involved a coordinated group, with no consensus reached publicly to date. Unverified claims have continued surfacing outside official channels. A Mexican nonprofit organization reported receiving a tip that Nancy was buried in an unmarked grave near Nogales, just south of the border. Separately, TMZ reported receiving multiple emails from someone claiming to possess hidden video footage of Nancy with her abductors. That same person denied sending the Mexico burial tip. None of these claims have been verified by investigators, and the FBI has said it is reviewing them. If you want to understand how investigators are separating fact from noise in real time, subscribe now, because this next part covers exactly where the case stands today. As of this recording, Nancy Guthrie has been missing for more than 160 days. No arrests have been made. No suspect has been publicly named. Sheriff Chris Nanos has stated that his department remains committed to the case and believes an arrest will eventually come, though he hasn't offered a timeline. Retired FBI agent Steve Moore recently offered a sobering take on the physical evidence. Referring back to the blood found at the scene, Moore said investigators have to consider the strong possibility that Nancy didn't survive long enough for her captors to even send a ransom note. His reasoning centers on a pattern seen in other cases, that kidnappers often abandon ransom plans entirely once a victim dies, since there's no longer anything to negotiate. He was careful to note this remains a working theory, not a confirmed outcome. Savannah Guthrie has continued to speak publicly, stating in an interview that her family still doesn't know anything concrete, and that they cannot find peace without answers. Sheriff Nanos has firmly defended the family throughout, stating clearly that they've been cleared as suspects and describing them as victims in this case, not subjects of suspicion. Behind the scenes, friction has reportedly emerged within the investigation itself. Moore suggested there's disagreement inside the FBI over how to classify the case, and even over the validity of certain evidence, differences he attributes to the gap between field agents and leadership. Which brings us back to where we started. Blood on a porch. A trail that stops short of the street, and a woman still missing more than 5 months later. If you have any information, contact the FBI or Pima County Sheriff's Department. Subscribe for updates as this case develops. Drop your theory in the comments and share this video, because more eyes on this case might be exactly what it needs.